Hello everyone, welcome to this first video of mine for the Airbus A320 by Fenix simulations for Microsoft Flight Simulator. You may well have heard about this aircraft. If you haven't, what have you been doing? But this is the first video that I'll be doing, and what better way to start than teaching you guys how to start the aircraft from cold and dark. So essentially, you've got to the aircraft in the morning, it's completely shut down, there's no power to the aircraft. What are you going to do? And that's what this video is all about. So without further ado, let's jump into the aircraft and we'll start off with what's known as a preliminary cockpit preparation. So I'm just going to, first of all, talk about the elephant in the room, which is the fact I'm in the FO seat. And I know many of people will say, well, why are you sat in the right-hand seat? It's because I'm a first officer in real life, and I much prefer to at least do the tutorial from a position I'm comfortable with. If you guys need to apply this to left-hand seat, well, just mirror what I'm doing and it's identical. So the first thing we need to do is a preliminary cockpit preparation. Now, what we tend to do is we tend to get the QRH out for this, and we just go through it line by line. Now, the first thing, engines, make sure they're off. Engine masters 1 and 2, make sure they're off. Engine mode selector in normal. Then head to the left over to the weather radar and make sure that's off. Make sure predictive wind shear is off. Just making sure the landing gear is down and also the both wipe selectors are off. So those critical items are off. We can now look at powering the aircraft. So the first thing we need to do is just make sure they are off to check the battery voltage. If they're below 25.5, then we will have to give them a charging cycle with the external power. However, we're lucky today that they are above 25.5, so we can just turn them on. And then once they're on, we can also turn on the external power. And I am just going to let you enjoy the sounds that comes with the external power turn on, the AVC coming to life, all of the warnings, and as it runs through its own self-test. I think you'll enjoy it. So let's go. Here we go. So once the aircraft is completely powered, and we've also heard all of the self-tests and the FWC is alive, the flight warning computer, then we can actually physically test the APU fire. So to make sure that before we start it up, if there were to be a fire, we would get notified of it. So we'll press that button, and then we'll just check that we have all the relevant warnings and chimes, etc. So usage of the APU itself can be quite controversial at some airfields. Some are very, very noise sensitive, so they prefer us not to use the APU unless we have to. Others don't really care, but also to be environmentally friendly, if we don't need the APU, then we tend to not use it. However, there has just been a global pandemic, and one of the things that we have been doing throughout the pandemic is having the APU bleed on to provide air conditioning to ensure circulation of the air within the cabin for the passengers. So anytime there's passengers on board, we have been using the APU. I assume that's going to go fairly soon, but yeah. So just a bit of insight into the APU usage. We do, of course, need to have the APU on prior to the ground crew removing the ground power downstairs. So now we've done the preliminary cockpit preparation, we'll look to do the cockpit preparation. Airbus were obviously really creative with our scanflow names, but this is one that we tend to do from memory, so this tends to be more of a prescribed flow rather than a checklist that you're reading. So this one's nice and straightforward in that you just start from the left hand side of the overhead, work your way up, and then just slowly move to the right. So we'll start to the left, all the way to the top, come back to the middle, all the way to the top, go to the right, all the way to the top. Nice and straightforward. So the first thing we'll do, crew supply, that can go on, ground control can go on, and then also we'll do a cockpit voice recorder test. Once you've had the beep, we can move up to the evac section and the captain and purser button. So this is basically deciding on who can initiate an evacuation. If it's set to captain, then that means only the captain or the flight crew can initiate an evacuation. But if it's set to captain and purser, that means the cabin crew can also initiate one if they so need to. Then we come up to the inertial reference system. Here you can see it's IR1, 3 and then 2. It's in that order because IR1 and 2 are respective for the captain and FI, and the third one is the backup in the event that you have one fail. So we tend to align them in number order, so 1, 2 and then 3. And once you have aligned them, you do have to wait for the on-bat to disappear before you then align the next one. So now coming back to the middle, again starting at the bottom, we have the external lights. So we'll turn some of those on, making sure the others are off. So anything outside forward facing wise, because they're still parked on stand, we don't need the runway turn-offs, we don't need the landing lights, and we don't need the nose lights. We can put the strobes in auto. That essentially means that if the strobes are in auto, they'll automatically come on once you're airborne. So if we did forget to turn them on entering the runway, it's not the end of the world, they'll come on when we get airborne. Beacon can stay off because that warns people we're about to start the engines. Wing lights can remain off, we don't need those right now. And the nav lights can go to system 1 or 2. They're identical, it's just different circuits and different light bulbs in case there was an issue with one of them. Coming across, seatbelts, they can remain off because we are going to refuel the aircraft shortly, and then the no smoking signs can come to auto. Emergency exit lights can be armed as well. Then we come up, check the landing elevation is in auto, check the mode selector is also in auto, check the crossbleed is in auto. Lots and lots of auto here. Then we continue on our way up as well, and we'll look to do the engine fire tests. So same as what we did with the APU. So engine 1, making sure everything lights up and the squibs are lit up, etc., and also checking for all the warning lights. The additional one that we do have to check as well on the engine side is we check that right next to the engine master there's a fire light there as well. So do that for both engines 1 and 2. So now working our way up the right hand side, this very much sits with the standard Airbus philosophy of all lights out. So just making sure everything is extinguished really, just make sure there's no lights that are either on or off with any blues or yellows showing. Once we get up to the top, we make sure that the PA button is receiving, and that's the only one that needs to be there. That's actually for the cockpit voice recorder. We won't actually listen to that ourselves, but it just means the cockpit voice recorder gets a feed of the PAs as well, so that at least if anything does happen, they can hear what was going on the PA as well. Then we just work our way up to the maintenance panel at the top and just make sure we have no white lights on there. That panel up there, you really won't ever need to touch. Outside of maintenance actions. The Neo is slightly different. You do end up having to power the Fenix from time to time, but on the COs, very rarely do you ever need that one. The only button on top of there that you sometimes might touch, which I will cover off in subsequent videos, is the blue pump override. That's the only one that potentially you might look at, but yeah. So that is the overhead done. Once we have done the overhead, we then come to the right hand side and kind of sweep from the right all the way into the middle. So of course this is a fully modelled aircraft, so why would they not have modelled the oxygen? So you have the standard Airbus oxygen masks here on the Fenix 320. You have 2 on the right hand side, 2 on the left hand side, so you've got one for yourself and one for the person on the jumpsuit behind you. Now we also would check on the ECAM and just double check that the oxygen pressure is good. That's actually on the door page. You can see top right, it tells you how much what the pressure is on those. There are limitations. It'll go amber if it's particularly low, but you can check in your FCOM what is acceptable for the number of occupants on the flight deck. To check the aircraft has working oxygen mask, what you do is you press to test the button and you'll hear it, and you'll also see the pressure above with the yellow cross. In real life you can't read it at the sim because you only have one mouse, but you'd also press to test and also press the emergency button, and then you also just press the emergency button. Now what we also do when we're testing these is we tend to turn on the loudspeaker and also turn on the intercom, which would also mean that if you hear it on the loudspeaker, then of course you're able to communicate with your colleague in air traffic control through the mask. Before we do that test though, we do tell the ground crew that we're going to do it, because if they're plugged into the headset they can hear the intercom and we would end up blasting them with the oxygen sound, and you know, they tend to get a bit angry with us. So if you are going to do that, what we would tend to do is turn on the intercom and say flight to ground. They'd then come back and say ground flight deck, go ahead, and then we would tell them what we're going to do, and they just take their headset off for 30 seconds just while we do that test. Now while we're over here, we might as well get ourselves set up with the electronic flight bag. So the first thing to do, unlock the device. You can either hover over the Touch ID to unlock, or you can unlock it with numbers. The passcode is 0000. And then once you've done that, I would probably recommend going to your settings app and just making sure your SimBrief ID is set to your current SimBrief ID. Then once you've done that, pop to the Fenix app and import your flight plan. You'll then see all the details that you've previously planned, and of course gives you your scheduled departure time and how long it is until you depart. Now key here, if you do depart late, don't forget it is going to send you a message for you to justify that reason. So keep an eye on the time as we do in real life, because time is everything in aviation. So once you're happy with the details of the flight, I probably recommend then going to the mass and balance page and you can load the aircraft. Let's do fast boarding here. You can of course do instant or real time, it's up to you, but fast boarding makes sense for this video. As you can see, as passengers board, their seats will light up. You can also see their details as they board, so as in real life, if they do have any special requirements, we can cater to them. So the next thing I would probably do would be go to the Pilot Brief app and download the flight plan and to just have a look at what we're doing, so then I know exactly what SID and STAR to load into the McDo when I get there. On top of that, it's also good to know, because then when I set up my charts, which I'm going to do next, I know which ones to pin for the departure. So with that in mind, let's go to the Navigraph app, and of course if you haven't authenticated your account just yet, you will have to do that, but it's fairly simple. Scan the QR code, fill out the login details, and it will then automatically set you up. You then don't need to do it again unless you don't use the aircraft for a year, or of course your Navigraph subscription expires. Now it's worth noting at this point that you don't necessarily need to do all this in the same order I'm doing it. It's just I find it easier to get everything in the EFB done and ready and sorted. Then once we've got all that sorted, we can pop into the McDo and we can do that from there. So I get all my charts set up, decide on what I'm going to pin, makes life a lot easier later on down the line. Of course, you may not know at this point which departure you're going to do, because you might be relying on a clearance, but you can always give it a good guess, and of course you can always change it later. Also, while I'm here in the Navigraph app, I'll also look to see if there is an initial climb altitude marked on the chart. If there is, I'll go ahead and set that in the FCU. If there's not, then you'll get it by clearance from air traffic control. So next up, I know I'm going to need to do the departure performance. So let's go ahead and open that up and start filling that data out. This can be really quite straightforward if you have all the data ready to go. So you know where you're departing from, and also you have imported your flight plan, which means the load sheet is available to sync. So really all you need to do is select the runway, sync the load sheet, sync the weather, and press calculate, and it'll all come up for you in the top right hand corner. So again, I'm just going to leave that there because it's going to be helpful for us when we come to do the McDo in a second. But we've now done everything we needed to do on the EFB before we head down into the McDo to do those items. So now we'll come down to the McDo and we'll start entering our route data. So one of the acronyms to remember here in terms of the ordering is really helpful to remember, but it can be quite hard to remember because it doesn't really necessarily mean anything. But if you can come up with some sort of clever mnemonic, then I'd love to read it in the comments below, because I'd love to be able to share that with people. No rude ones though, please. The acronym itself is DIFRS-IP. So D is data, I is init, as in init A, F is flight plan, R is radnavs, S is secondary, I is init B, and P is path. So DIFRS-IP. Okay, so first up, the D for data. So if we go to the data page and then press aircraft status, you should be able to see the navigation database that's currently loaded into the aircraft. You'll want that to be up to date to make sure that your SimBrief import goes without a glitch. However, sometimes if you don't have an up-to-date Navigraph subscription, that may be out of date. Your uplink may still work, but of course it may not. In real life, that would always be up to date, of course. Next up is the I, the inner page, so you can press init request. That will then pull in your flight from SimBrief, and will fill out quite a few of these boxes for you. You just need to go down and fill out the rest. Then you can go to the wind page, press the wind request. That'll uplink the winds from SimBrief, and then also IRS in it. If you do get here before your IRs have aligned, on the bottom right hand side there will be something that says align on ref, which you can press, which actually aligns the IRs based on your position. So now moving on to the F for flight plan, you'll notice that most of the route has already been populated for us, which is really helpful. The only thing we need to do is select the departure and the arrival. So we'll go ahead and we'll select the top left, select the runway and the departure we're doing. We'll insert that, then we'll go to the bottom left, set the arrival and the star that we're going to do. Okay, so next up on the acronym was the R for radnavs, so we'll go to that page. You notice how at the moment all of the letters are small font. So that means the aircraft itself is in charge of changing them as you fly. I would most of the time leave them to free tune, unless there's something in particular, such as an emergency turn that we need to consider, or if there is a particular VOR that's really important on the SID, I may choose to hard tune it. If you want to do that, then you would just type it in again and overwrite it, and that will then make it a large font, which will then mean that it won't change. If it's in small font as you fly, it will change to other VORs as you go. So next up in the sequence is the S for secondary flight plan. Go into there, copy the active, and then what we tend to do is we tend to put a return onto the runway you just took off from. It means if you have like a serious problem, like a fire that won't go out, or perhaps a fumes event, you can just come back in without having to do too much faff in the box, because when you're under a big emergency situation, you don't want to have to be doing loads of admin tasks. So with that in mind, would probably do a lateral revision onto one of the waypoints on the departure, and you'll see on the right hand side it says new destination, so I'd put the departure ICAO back into that, and then that shows us your new arrival, and you can essentially do exactly what we did before and enter the arrival into the box for that. So now on the secondary you have essentially a very short flight from takeoff to landing on the same runway, which is perfect for the event of a big problem. So we're back to I again, which means we need to go to the inner page, but this time we need to go to the inner B page, and this is where you initialize your weights. You tell the aircraft how heavy you are. So in order to do that, we should have a load sheet in our ATSU, which is our data link side of things. So I tend to pop over to the other MCDO, which is really helpful to have two independent MCDOs because it means you can bring up your ATSU on one and have the inner B on the other. So you go to the ASC menu, received messages, load sheet. So you can see here on the load sheet you have a 0 fuel weight, you have a 0 fuel weight CG. So you can enter those straight off the load sheet. In terms of the block fuel, we'll read that from the lower ECAM display, and once you've got that, the other values will populate. So last but not least, we'll now do the takeoff performance on the P, so perf page, and then if you remember, across on the EFB, we calculated our departure performance earlier, so in the top right, you'll let that looks suspiciously like the performance page of the MCDO, so literally just copy it across word for word. So once you've done that, that is the MCDO set up and ready to go. We have a few other bits to do, and then we'll be pretty much there and ready to go. So with that in mind, we are getting close to our departure now, so it might be a good time to start the APU, and that at least means the ground staff can do their bits and pieces to get rid of the ground power and things like that. Also, we'll set up the FCU, so we'll set the QNH, we'll set the constraints, we'll also turn the flight directors on if they're not already, and also just set up any other bits and pieces that we need in terms of your VORs, ADFs, things like that. So that's the FCU done, and then coming down in the middle of the panel, you have, if you have elected to go for the retro standby instruments, then you need to fast direct the attitude indicator, and also you can set your bugs. So in terms of speeds, I would probably set something like green dot and also your V2 speed, and then on your altimeter I'd probably set something like the transition altitude as a bug. But it's entirely up to you, whatever you feel is helpful to you. Now you'll also notice we've finished fueling, so it's worth putting the seatbelt signs on as well. Coming down onto the into the middle, we want to check a few things, so we'll check the engine page, check the engine oil. We'll then also go to the hydraulic page and also check the hydraulic quantity as well. Continuing to come down the middle, we can set up our radios, and we can make sure that all of the other levers are in the right place, make sure the transponder is in standby, and also the TCAS is in standby as well, and ensure the parking brake is set. So now you'll notice the APU has started, so what we can do is we can go in there, remove the ground power, and turn on the APU bleed, and then also once the ground power is out, we can turn on the fuel pumps, and that pretty much gets us to a place where we can do the before start checklist. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too boring, and I hope it was in depth enough that you were able to get something out of it. I did try and cover off pretty much everything we do to get the aircraft ready to push back, and of course if there are any questions you do have, then do let me know in the comments, and of course do join the Discord, discord.gg/KTPilot, and follow me over on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/KTPilot. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye guys.